Lars, if I am a freight forwarder or an NVOCC and I need to prepare my business either from the perspective of shippers' expectations in being able to track or measure their carbon emissions effectively, or in the larger realm of new taxes like EU ETS, or let's say possibly the global carbon emission tax, what should be my strategy for next 12 months? Do I need to worry about what should I work on?
Yeah, the one thing, if you're sitting as the middleman, as an NVOCC or freight forwarder, you need, of course, if you don't have it already, the ability to tell your customers what's the carbon emissions. And as a freight forwarder, the ideal approach would be either you have your own way of doing it, but that's only for the very largest to do that, or you find a third party and find this is how we're going to set it up, this is how we're going to measure it. Because it's a matter of saying, find how many tons of CO2 for your shipment. When it then comes to the taxation part of it, there's not really much the freight forwarders can do apart from warning their customers that, well, we're keeping an eye out on what are the surcharges that are coming from the carriers and say, we're going to have to pass these surcharges through. When it then comes to predicting the surcharges, I think we are going to see a significant increase in the EU ETS. That is just my personal view. And here's why. Right now, there are two things we need to recall about the ETS. First of all, it's a phased-in approach. Right now, carriers are only paying 40% of what they should here in 24. That then becomes 70%, and then becomes 100% in 26. Secondly, the way the ETS works, I am taxed on 50% of the journey to and from EU ports, from non-EU ports. So if I go, say, Shanghai to Rotterdam, I'm liable to pay carbon tax for half of that journey. Same thing going back. So far, so good. Here's where I see the problem come in, and that comes from the Red Sea. Obviously, going around Africa is a much, much longer journey.
Yep.
And the reporting of emissions in EU only takes place once a year in the beginning of the year. So sometime during Q1 2025, we're going to see the carbon emissions for 2024 reported by the carriers.
Right.
Those carbon emissions will now include going around Africa. This is not going to be a minor thing. I actually did some calculations here over the weekend. If I look only at what has happened until now, and let's assume the Red Sea opens up for transit tomorrow, this alone will result in an 8% increase in carbon emissions reported to the EU. If this continues for the rest of the year, we could potentially be looking at 25 to 28% increase. The 8% increase alone, that's already happened, that brings the emissions, again, not global emissions, this is the reportable emissions in the EU. That brings the emissions back to the level we last saw in 2019. That's 5 years of emissions reductions that have now been negated purely because of the Red Sea. And this gets worse. This becomes, in my view, a political issue then sometime in spring 2025. The political level is going to look at this and say, hang on a second. Here we have an industry that promised to reduce emissions, that we have pressure to reduce emissions through, for example, ETS, yet emissions are increasing. Of course, the fact here is that's because we have to go around Africa. There is no choice. But I think at a political level, there'll be much more focus on, well, you're increasing emissions. So clearly what we have been doing so far is not enough. We need to do more.
Well,
and again, this is just my guess on what will transpire. Somebody will look and say, well, the problem is now you go all the way around Africa, but you're only paying tax on half of it because it's only 50% of the emissions, Shanghai, Rotterdam. Why are you only paying half of the added emissions? Maybe you should pay full or something else. I think there will be an enormous pressure in 2025, specifically in the EU, to amp up the pressure on shipping because they will see shipping as going in the wrong direction. Shipping will come out also factually and point out this is due to events completely outside of their control. It's the Red Sea problem. But this is going to be a political issue and not an issue discussing supply chain facts.
And with all these developments happening, Lars, Do you see any implications on the spot and contract rates and maybe how shippers should think about it?
You can say the way this has been approached, and I don't think that is necessarily going to change, is the carriers have done what they always do when there are new elements coming in. They create new surcharges. So we got the new ETS surcharges, and I think that's how they're going to continue to handle it.
So you believe rates going higher in the coming quarters, 2025?
Yeah, you can say for the ETS charges, they are going to go higher because they're going to reflect also going around Africa, and as the years progress, they will certainly go higher as the ETS goes from 40 to 70 to 100%, and that is going to be applicable both in spot, and you're going to see it applicable in contracts as well. This is no different than how the carriers also try to have bunker adjustment surcharges or whatever fancy names they give to them.